I'm a Battlemage.
Hey everyone, this is Shpan, and we're back at it with another Daggerfall bite-sized builds video. Thanks to everyone who voted on the next class. You guys voted for the Battlemage. The Battlemage is an interesting class concept and a little tricky as well, because over the years, I've seen a lot of different interpretations of the class. For me, it's really difficult to pinpoint a single interpretation of the class that feels most represented in fantasy. I've seen interpretations where it's a fully armored warrior with heavy martial weapons and access to powerful close-range spells, and I've also seen interpretations of the class where the Battlemage is wearing robes and uses protective and defensive magic to stay in close range, sometimes dual-wielding a staff and a sword, preferring close-range incorporation of both martial and magical offense. I see Battlemages as having access to a variety of different spell schools, needing many of the spells in both the Alteration, Thaumaturgy schools of magic, in order to fortify their somewhat weak defense due to their restriction to lighter armors and shields. The Battlemage is built to be effective with both martial and magic, and needs the proper defensive buffs to really make use of those strengths. As a result, I believe Destruction, Alteration, and a single weapon skill of your choice is really where the focus of the class should be for most of the playthrough. So how should the class play? Considering all of that, to better narrow the scope for this class fantasy, I wanted to refer to both what the original Daggerfall class had in mind, and how the Elder Scrolls series generally portrays the class. When we look at the original class design by the Daggerfall team, we can get a better idea of how Battlemages were intended to be represented in the Elder Scrolls universe. And interestingly enough, they restricted the Battlemage from wearing anything other than leather armor, and also restricted them from wearing kite or towered shields. This gives me some good insight into their interpretation of the class, and seems to suggest that they were leaning more towards the second interpretation that I mentioned earlier, the Battlemage that's wearing less protective armor and leans more into lighter shields and one-handed weaponry with defensive spells. The original design for the class, including long blade and axe as primary choices for weapons, seems like a good fit to me, and interestingly, the Daggerfall user guide class description specifically mentions that Battlemages are the antithesis of the healer. This is a pretty strong defining characteristic of their vision for the class, and I would have thought that this might prohibit the class from restoration magic. However, the Battlemage was given restoration as a minor skill, to more cleanly fit into the fantasy that the Daggerfall team themselves characterize the class as. I won't be choosing restoration as a skill. Okay, with all that said, I think from this information we're ready to rebuild the concept into our own style. Ideally, a Battlemage starts combat first by buffing themselves with a number of alteration defensive spells, determining which types of enemies they're encountering in the specific dungeon or space that they're in, and using whatever appropriate defensive spells would work against those targets. For this to work, we really need access to a few key defensive spells: Shalador's Mirror, Spell Shield, Shield, and Resist whichever element. A Battlemage that's in a dungeon with many casters needs access to spells like Shalador's Mirror or Spell Shield. These spells are expensive for their duration, but the Battlemage only needs a short amount of time to dish out their huge offensive potential, and you should pop these spells after seeing the enemy you're about to engage with. If there's a bunch of elemental damage, then Resist Fire, Poison, Shock, or Cold is needed. And finally, when going up against melee-heavy enemies, the Shield spell will be a very important component of the build. The Shield spell, not to be confused with Spell Shield, is a super underrated spell in my opinion, especially for the early game when we'll feel most squishy. Shield lasts a decent amount of rounds, which is already great, and has a 100% chance to succeed, so you'll never fail your cast. The amount of damage absorbed scales with your level. On top of all of this, it's relatively cheap for how reliable and long-lasting the buff is. It's going to be the key early game spell because we want the Battlemage to functionally perform like a melee caster, and to do so with our armor restrictions, we need to early on in the playthrough prioritize a few key defensive spells. One of the great benefits of being a melee-oriented caster is that we can make more use of touch spells, which on average cost less for similar damage than a projectile spell because they have the penalty of needing to be up close. Luckily for the Battlemage, we excel up close and can take advantage of the cheaper touch spells that are usually more difficult for a pure caster to utilize effectively. Shock is a great early choice for a touch spell. While the damage ticks every round, we can swap to our melee weapon and output a ton of damage very quickly. In general, we want to weave melee attacks in between spell casts. So spells that have a continuous damage per round component, like Shock or Wildfire for example, are really excellent spell choices for this build. Eventually, when making your own spells, try to focus on continuous damage effects so you can cast that spell, swap to your melee, and be getting both damage from your continuous damage effect and your melee strikes at the same time. This is the way I would play a Battlemage, And if I were to show an example spell real quick, I could make something like Fire Nova or Lightning Nova, or whichever element you like really. We'd make it a continuous damage spell that is an area effect around us. Whenever we have a large group of enemies, we can pop our shield for defense, use Lightning Nova to place a damage over time shock effect on everyone, and then focus on our melee. It's a lot of fun and really effective. And now let's get into the character creation. Starting off with the primary skills, the Battle Mage absolutely needs access to Destruction Magic, and making our Destruction Magic effective and efficient is going to be a major focus of the build. Next up, we need to choose a weapon, and the Long Blade will probably feel the most thematically accurate to most players, so I'll be grabbing that one. But I feel like a one-handed axe also works well too. For the major skills, I'll be grabbing some of the staple melee skill options, Critical Strike and Dodging. This will make our melee attacks more effective and allow us to be a bit tankier when fighting up close. For the last major skill, Thaumaturgy is a good choice because it'll provide us with a bunch of useful utility spells like Levitate and Water Walking, but most importantly, it gives us access to spell resistance and spell reflection, which we want to be at affordable spell cost for whenever we fight against spellcasting enemies. Moving on to the minor skills, I personally won't be grabbing Restoration at all, like I mentioned earlier, and I'll be skipping on Illusion as well. However, Mysticism is a great choice to round out the Battle Mage with a few more utility spells, with the most important one being Teleport. Minor skills aren't super important, so feel free to grab what you think is conceptually cool or a good fit for the class. For our advantages, even though there are a lot of inexpensive melee benefits like athleticism and adrenaline rush, they don't really fit the class fantasy in my opinion, so I'll be skipping those. Instead, grab expertise in whichever weapon skill you chose in the primary skill slot. For me, it's the Long Blade. We definitely need 3 times int in spell points for this build, so make sure you grab that too. I think resistance to magic is also a cool fit for this class, as having some baseline durability against magic always made sense to me for a build concept like this. It feels like to me it's the closest thing we have to a passive chance to counterspell. This is more of a flavor choice, so feel free to skip it if you personally don't feel it's a good fit. Moving on to the disadvantages, we're going to take inspiration from the original class design here. First, we'll grab Forbidden from Plate and Chain Armor, restricting us to only leather. We'll also get Forbidden from Tower and Kite Shields. This means we'll be wearing round shields throughout our playthrough. The game doesn't consider most of these to be heavy restrictions, so we need to make some bigger sacrifices so we can pump up our max HP points per level without forcing us to level up too slowly. So I felt a critical weakness to both disease and poison would be a pretty good fit. The Battle Mage doesn't have the physical fortitude of a strong warrior or barbarian, relying more on defensive spells rather than physical strength, and so is more susceptible to bodily ailments. Both of these can also be managed pretty well if you stay well prepared with your stock of potions. If you decided to grab Restoration as a minor skill earlier, then these two are even better options because you'll easily be able to cure them at any stage of the game. We have room for another disadvantage, so feel free to grab whatever you want. I'll be taking Forbidden Weaponry Missile Weapon. Now let's pump up our max HP gain per level to somewhere between 20 and 24. We want a good amount of health, but I personally prefer not to delay my experience gain by too much. If you took a heavier final disadvantage, like Forbidden from Steel for example, then you should be able to get your max HP gain per level to 30 or close to 30 while still being below normal XP rate. And now let's speed through our 12 background questions. By playing this way, the Battle Mage should be effective for a lot longer than a more traditional caster build before needing to rest. The Battle Mage is also for similar reasons very adaptable, able to shift their combat focus to melee when it's more effective, or magic when that's more effective. Against a caster that's popped Shadow's Mirror, or against any Lich or Ghost that's draining your spell points with Wizard's Rend, your melee prowess is really going to shine. Against more easily kiteable enemies and long-range enemies like archers, your long-distance offensive spell arsenal is going to be really effective. And in that way, the Battle Mage really always has a viable strategy when going up against any enemy in the game. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this one. It was honestly a bit tricky deciding how I wanted the Battle Mage to be built and how I thought it should be played. Let me know in the comments which class I should make in the next episode. Thanks for watching everyone, and take care.